toss.
Yeah.
Jason, is the timekeeper ready? Opening arguments. Should all drugs be legal, Dr. Clarke?
All right. So I'm asking you today to reconsider your views on the legality of drug use in America. For many of you, if not most, I will probably be asking you to change your mind. So I'd like to take a second to know what this means, what changing your mind means, and how to do it. So my views on this issue have changed over time. I've been convinced by rational argument that my previous views were wrong. I imagine that some of your views on some issues have changed as well. So before we get into this issue, I'd ask you to try to think about a time when you were wrong and remember what that felt like, being wrong. And I'll wait for a second. Maybe you're probably remembering the embarrassment and shame of being wrong. And if that's the case, you're not remembering being wrong. You're remembering finding out that you were wrong. And those are two different things. When you were wrong, you of course just felt that you were right. It felt exactly like being right. Beliefs that are right and those that are wrong both feel just as correct. And those that believe them, believe they're correct. That's what it means to have a belief. So now, how do we find out that our beliefs are wrong? There's a couple of ways. If I believe there's no such thing as a black swan, and then somebody shows me a black swan, then I thereby have found out that my belief is incorrect. But I can also be shown the reasons that I have for believing that there are no black swans. Perhaps my good friend Levi just told me there aren't any black swans. And maybe someone points out that that's not a very good argument. I can be shown that the reasons for my belief aren't good reasons. And finally, I can be shown a good argument for the negation of my original belief. So there's one more step I need to make before I fully state my thesis here, and that's to talk about what it means for something to be illegal or legal. Making something legal does not mean that we endorse or like that thing. It doesn't mean we approve of that thing, that we would even think about doing that thing, or would tolerate that kind of thing being done on our own property. Saying an activity should be legal means merely that we are not going to hunt down people who do that activity, regardless of their behavior apart from doing that activity. Separate them from their family and friends at gunpoint, take them away from their possessions, and lock them in a cage for a non-negligible part of their lives. Merely, and this is important, merely for participating in that activity. Some immoral activities, like willful murder, assault and battery, rape, etc., surely warrant such a penalty. Some benevolent activities, like soccer, badminton, reading Shakespeare, and learning Spanish, don't warrant that kind of penalty. But there are other activities, like smoking cigarettes, drinking too much, having lots of indiscriminate sex, ruining your credit, eating only fast food, having an affair, or moving to Florida. These might all be activities. But they're not the kind of activities for which you should be locked up in a cage. So with all that in place, I'm arguing that drugs should be illegal. All drugs, yes, all of them. If you disagree with that, please consider that you might be wrong, and I'm going to spend some time trying to convince you that that's the case.
Yeah. All right, so I want to start off by kind of framing this a little bit, since it's kind of a big question, right? So what I want you to think about, because I've also changed my mind a couple times on this issue, So what I want to help you understand this, so I'm going to try to narrow things down so that it's a little bit simpler to kind of think through your thoughts on all this. So if a drug that you think is relatively harmless, okay? Think of a drug that you think is relatively harmless, but it's also illegal, okay? So if you can think of a drug that's relatively harmless, and I can convince you that actually that drug is a lot worse than you think it is, okay, then maybe the other drugs that you think are really bad, maybe it would make sense for some of those to be illegal, right? So something you think is not a big deal, it's not really that harmful, maybe I can convince you that it is more harmful than you think it is, then the really bad ones, maybe it should be illegal. So I want to say a few things about how we can evaluate whether these drugs should be legal. So first of all, drug use does not just affect one person. But even if it did, right, we have seatbelt laws, right? And those seatbelt laws incentivize you to wear your seatbelt when you might otherwise not wear your seatbelt, right? So one way to think about the legality of these drugs is to think about an economic argument. If these drugs are legalized, that will decrease the cost of producing them, right? It's very risky to produce drugs when they're illegal. So that will increase the supply of them. And it will also increase the demand for those drugs because people that might not have otherwise used them if they were illegal will now potentially want to use them. So we'll get a lot more of that drug use. The second one is that when we make something legal, and we have seen this with the drug I want to focus on, which is marijuana. So as we have seen in the US, some states legalizing marijuana, the particular way it has been legalized has led to some interesting consequences. So people will often use an analogy to making alcohol illegal, right, back in the 20s or something. And that had all kinds of effects on the potency of the drug itself, the alcohol that people consume. So legalization has actually increased the potency of marijuana. And this is very dangerous because of the second issue, which is a physical issue. Use of marijuana by teens who are genetically predisposed to schizophrenia have a much higher probability of developing schizophrenic symptoms with usage of marijuana. Schizophrenia is a horrible disease. It leads to 10 to 15% of people with schizophrenia successfully commit suicide every year. 60% of males with schizophrenia attempt suicide. So it's not a very safe type of thing. If you are predisposed to schizophrenia, then this drug makes it a lot worse. And there's a final argument is political. Sometimes in life, we like to think that there are second chances, right? We mess up, maybe we go bankrupt, we lose all our money, we can start over, right? We get a bad grade on a test, we can try harder on the next one. But sometimes there are no second chances. And specifically with legalizing drugs, there's probably not going to be a second chance. If you get a tattoo of Justin Bieber on your cheek, it's probably going to affect you the rest of your life, right? It's not coming off. So I'll go into this a little bit more as I go, but consider that there might not be a second chance if you legalize drugs.
Okay, you're going into Crossfire. You can ask questions back and forth. You have around 8 minutes.
Between the two of us? Would you like to start?
Sure, I'll go ahead. So I have a question about something you said at the beginning. You said hunt down people and use, and take them at gunpoint and all this sort of thing. So do you think that making something illegal necessarily implies something about the way we carry out that illegality? For instance, where driving without your seatbelt is illegal, but that doesn't imply that we hunt people down at gunpoint and put them in prison for the rest of their lives just because they don't wear their seatbelt.
Well, if you resist wearing your seatbelt for long enough, they'll kill you.
Okay. But how many cases would you say that entails. Like, so it's illegal to not wear your seatbelt, but for most of the people who don't wear the seatbelt, they put their seatbelts on and they go about their day, right?
Yeah, and cards on the table, look, I'm against seatbelt laws too. And this is somebody, I would never, ever, ever get in a car without putting on my seatbelt. But I don't think that it's the government's right or responsibility to tell you to put on your seatbelt and to make you wear it. The same with motorcycle helmets. So in Kansas, you're not required to wear a motorcycle helmet. I have a bunch of friends that ride motorcycles without motorcycle helmets, and I think they're stupid for doing so. But where I got my motorcycle license in California, I had to wear helmets all the time. I resented the fact that I had to wear one, even though when I owned a motorcycle in Kansas, I never rode it without it. So I generally reject the paternalist argument in principle. I guess that's my answer.
Your turn.
Oh, my turn. Is it your contention that marijuana is actually worse for the user than alcohol?
I don't think so necessarily. I mean, I don't really know. I mean, this is a great example, I think, of the no second chance issue. Is that because alcohol was legal at some point, then back in the day, a long time ago, we tried to make it illegal, and it didn't work out because everybody freaked out about it, right? And so now we have 40,000 people dying every year on the roads because they have easy access to alcohol. Now, sure, driving with alcohol is illegal. But the point is, we've already made it so that the cost of producing alcohol is low and the demand for it is very high. And so we've already sort of gone down that road and we can't turn around. So I think alcohol is a great example of my point, which is that be very careful when previous wisdom says that there should be some kind of restriction on this. If you take the restriction away, you may never be able to put it back. And so if something goes wrong, you're in trouble.
Yeah, this is something I'm going to get back to a little bit later about second chances. We have, in 2000 it was a little over 500,000, now it's a little less than 500,000, but still around 500,000 people in jail whose most serious crime is a drug-related offense. They're not getting the second chance. So if you want to talk about second chances...
So are you asking me a question?
Yes. Do you consider their second chance as important as this hypothetical second chance that the state isn't going to get?
Yeah, so the way I would respond to that is to say that the particular means of enforcement of the laws don't necessarily have anything to do with the illegality itself, right? So driving without your seatbelt can be illegal, so can shooting somebody for fun, right? And the means with which we use to find those people, go about arresting them, putting them somewhere in jail maybe, or maybe we have some kind of more harsh punishment for them. In other words, the punishment and the means of apprehending the criminal or the fine we impose on them doesn't necessarily have anything to do with whether or not it's legal. So it's a separate question, in my mind. So I have another question. So it was interesting again, I think, when you talked about this hunting and the gunpoint thing. So I guess I'll kind of flip it back on you. Like, do you think there's something inherent about whether I make something illegal that says that I must use maximum force? Or in empirical reality, in the way things normally work, do we normally have somewhat reasonable enforcement of most laws?
Well, if we're going to answer that question, we should talk about the enforcement of the actual drug laws. And they are enforced at gunpoint. If you get no-knock raids, they come in the middle of the night where, kids get their sheets blown off. So I am talking about the way the laws are actually enforced now. If you're going to say, well, we should have this different hypothetical state that'll enforce the laws that I want in this way, I think, to me, that seems a little bit like dodging the question. So, that's a question for you.
Sure.
Is your argument essentially that drugs harm the users to a certain degree, and that things that are harmful to users to that degree ought to be prohibited by the state?
Yeah, I think that there is a degree of wisdom that has to be exercised on the punishment for certain things and the prohibitions we put on different substances. So caffeine may harm you by increasing your blood pressure or something like that, but the harm of that is small enough that, sort of normal, perennial, just the average person on the street would say that, okay, well, it shouldn't be illegal just because it might raise your blood pressure a little bit. But certainly the more dangerous drugs like methamphetamines or crack or heroin are incredibly dangerous and they devastate people. So it's not necessarily just a matter of, on average, what the harm is across the entire population. It's these concrete cases of people whose lives are just completely ruined by these substances. And so if we're going, like I said, and it hasn't been contested, if we're going to reduce the cost of production of these things and increase the demand for them, I mean, we're going to have a big problem.